My dad just handed over our $2 million company to my sister on Christmas morning. After 15 years of building it from scratch, she got everything, and I got $500 and a goodbye letter. So at 3 a.m., I made sure to block everything with my name on it in that company. And when morning came, nothing in the company worked. And what did they do? So if you want to find out, click the subscribe button and stay with us until the end. Believe me, you'll want to hear every detail of what I did. Have you signed up yet? Okay, now let me tell you from the beginning. My name is Rachel, and I need to tell you about the Christmas that destroyed our family forever. But to understand how 15 years of my life led to that moment, you need to know how it all started. I was 8 years old when my sister Emma was born, and from the very first day, I watched my parents' love split in a way that would define our entire relationship. While I was expected to be the responsible older sister, Emma became their precious miracle baby who could do no wrong. I remember changing her diapers while mom rested, making her bottles while dad worked late, and always being told I was such a good big sister. What I didn't realize then was that I was being groomed for a lifetime of invisible labor. Even as a child, I was the one who cleaned up messes, solved problems, and made sure everything ran smoothly. Emma learned early that tears and tantrums got her attention, while my competence got me more responsibilities. The pattern was set before either of us could even spell our own names. And somehow, I convinced myself this was love. Growing up, the differences between us became more obvious with each passing year. Emma got piano lessons, dance classes, and art camps while I got after-school jobs to build character. When she struggled in school, they hired expensive tutors. When I struggled, I was told to figure it out myself because I was naturally smart. Family photos tell the whole story. Emma always front and center in pretty dresses, while I'm positioned slightly behind, usually holding something or cleaning something up. During family dinners, conversations revolved around Emma's latest achievements, dreams, and problems, while my accomplishments were mentioned briefly before moving back to her. I learned to smile and nod, to celebrate her wins as if they were my own, to make myself smaller so she could shine brighter. Friends would comment on how lucky Emma was to have such a supportive sister, never noticing that support only flowed in one direction. By high school, I had perfected the art of being indispensable while feeling completely invisible. It hurt, but I told myself that's just how families work. When it came time for college, the family's priorities became crystal clear in black and white numbers. I had earned a partial scholarship to study business administration at our state university, but still needed help with expenses. Dad sat me down and explained they could only afford to contribute a little because they were saving for Emma's education. Meanwhile, Emma breezed through high school with average grades and announced she wanted to attend an expensive private college for art history. Guess who got their full tuition paid without question? I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college, lived on ramen noodles and coffee, and graduated with honors while drowning in student debt. Emma changed her major 4 times, studied abroad twice, and graduated with a degree she never planned to use. After graduation, she casually mentioned wanting to get an MBA just for fun. And guess what? Dad wrote another check without hesitation. I had proven myself capable and driven, but Emma had proven herself precious. The lesson was loud and clear. Competence gets you more work, but being the favorite gets you everything handed to you on a silver platter. At 23, fresh out of college and buried in debt, I swallowed my pride and asked Dad if there might be a position at his small manufacturing company. He acted like he was doing me a huge favor by offering me an entry-level position in operations, starting at barely above minimum wage. I was grateful for any opportunity to start building my career and paying off my loans. What I didn't know was that this decision would consume the next 15 years of my life. I started in the warehouse, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I worked overtime without extra pay, came in on weekends to fix problems, and treated every challenge like a personal mission. Dad would occasionally praise my strong work ethic, but always followed it with reminders that I was still learning the ropes. Meanwhile, Emma was backpacking through Europe on what she called her gap year before grad school. I convinced myself that hard work would eventually pay off, that proving my value would earn me the recognition I craved. I threw myself into that job like my life depended on it. Because in many ways, it did. Those early years at the company were a blur of 18-hour days, missed social events, and relationships that withered from neglect. While my college friends were building careers, traveling, and starting families, I was married to a business that barely acknowledged my existence. I turned down job offers from competitors because Dad insisted I was part of the business legacy and that patience would be rewarded. I broke up with a wonderful man named David because I couldn't balance his needs with the company's demands, a decision that still haunts me. I skipped family vacations, friends' weddings, and countless opportunities for personal happiness because the business always came first. Dad had a way of making every crisis seem like it would destroy the company if I wasn't there to fix it. I believed him because I wanted to believe that my sacrifices meant something. I thought I was building my future, but I was actually building my prison. Every day I chose the company over my own life, I was digging myself deeper into a hole I couldn't see. While I was sacrificing everything for the family business, Emma was living her best life as a professional student and world traveler. She floated in and out of our lives like a beautiful butterfly, always arriving with stories from her latest adventure or academic achievement. She'd breeze through the office occasionally, usually when she needed money, offering unhelpful suggestions about modernizing things she didn't understand. Dad would light up whenever she appeared, proudly introducing her to clients as my daughter with the MBA from Northwestern. I was just Rachel from operations, if I was introduced at all. Emma never stayed long enough to get her hands dirty or understand the real challenges we faced daily. She lived in a world of theory and possibilities, while I lived in the world of problems that needed solving right now. Watching her skip through life while I carried the weight of responsibility created a resentment I tried desperately to bury. I told myself her happiness should be enough for me, that good sisters don't feel jealous. But the seed of bitterness was already growing, watered by years of invisible effort and thankless dedication. For 15 years, I poured my heart, soul, and sanity into building something I believed would eventually be mine. I innovated systems, solved critical problems, and turned a struggling company into a profitable enterprise worth millions. I convinced myself that Dad was just waiting for the right moment to officially recognize my contributions, maybe even make me a partner. Every small compliment felt like validation. Every increased responsibility felt like progress toward my rightful place in the family legacy. I learned to read the signs of Dad's approval, like a starving person hoarding crumbs, grateful for any acknowledgement of my worth. Emma continued her carefree existence, occasionally gracing us with her presence when she needed something, while I became the backbone of an operation that wouldn't exist without me. I thought I understood the game I was playing, thought I knew the rules that would eventually lead to my reward. but I had no idea how deep their betrayal would go, or how Christmas morning would reveal the devastating truth about my place in this family. What happened next would shatter everything I believed about loyalty, love, and the value of hard work. What started as a small family manufacturing business became my life's work, though I never intended it that way. When I first walked through those factory doors, we were barely keeping our heads above water with outdated equipment and systems that belonged in the 1980s. I saw potential everywhere. Inefficient processes that could be streamlined, technology gaps that were costing us thousands, and opportunities our competitors were already exploiting. Dad seemed impressed by my observations, but always cautioned me to go slow and respect tradition. I didn't go slow. I worked nights and weekends studying our industry, learning new software, and developing solutions to problems that had plagued the company for years. Within my first year, I had identified 17 major inefficiencies and created detailed plans to address each one. I presented my findings in a comprehensive report, complete with cost-benefit analyses and implementation timelines. Dad patted me on the head like a proud parent and said, "Maybe we'll look into some of these ideas next year." Next year never came, so I started implementing changes quietly, proving their value through results rather than asking for permission. By my third year, I had revolutionized our entire operation in ways that Dad barely understood, but definitely noticed in the profit margins. I designed and implemented a custom inventory management system that reduced waste by 30% and eliminated the chronic stockouts that had plagued us for years. I created automated reporting systems that gave us real-time visibility into production metrics, quality control, and financial performance. Most importantly, I developed proprietary software solutions for our specific manufacturing processes, registering the patents and intellectual property in my own name, something I thought was just standard business practice at the time. These weren't minor improvements. They were game-changing innovations that transformed us from a struggling local business into a regional leader. Our efficiency rates skyrocketed, customer satisfaction improved dramatically, and profit margins reached levels Dad had never seen before. I foolishly thought he'd recognize my contributions and reward me accordingly. Instead, he started taking clients on tours of his facility, explaining his systems, and accepting praise for his vision. When industry publications wanted to interview the innovative mind behind our transformation, Dad graciously accepted the recognition while I continued working in the shadows. The success I brought to the company came at a devastating personal cost that I'm still calculating today. My relationship with David, the man I thought I might marry, slowly deteriorated under the weight of my obsession with work. He'd plan romantic dinners that I'd miss because of urgent projects, book weekend getaways that I'd cancel because Dad needed me to handle a crisis, and eventually stop trying altogether. I remember the night he told me he felt like he was dating a ghost, someone who was physically present but emotionally unavailable. I promised to change, to find better balance, to prioritize our relationship, but the next crisis always seemed more urgent than keeping my word. When he finally walked away, I convinced myself it was his loss, that he simply didn't understand my dedication to building something meaningful. I threw myself even deeper into work, using his absence as an excuse to spend even more time at the office. Friends stopped inviting me to events because I always declined. Family members gave up trying to include me in their lives, and I gradually isolated myself from everyone except the people who depended on my labor. I told myself that success required sacrifice, that I was building a legacy that would make all the loneliness worthwhile. Meanwhile, Emma continued her charmed existence as the family's beloved absent princess, occasionally gracing us with visits that felt more like royal inspections than sisterly connections. She'd sweep into the office wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry, having just returned from some exotic location or completed another costly degree program. During these brief appearances, she'd offer unsolicited advice about our outdated approach to business, suggesting we needed to think bigger and embrace modern strategies. The irony was suffocating. Here was someone who had never worked a real day in her life, who had never solved an actual business problem, lecturing me about the company I had literally rebuilt from the ground up. Dad would nod thoughtfully at her suggestions, praising her fresh perspective and innovative thinking, while completely ignoring the fact that I had already implemented most of these modern strategies years earlier. She'd stay just long enough to collect whatever financial assistance she needed, promise to stay in touch more often, and then disappear back to her carefree life while I returned to the daily grind of keeping everything running. Each visit left me feeling more invisible and undervalued, but I learned to smile and play the role of the supportive sister who was just grateful for her occasional presence. The most painful part wasn't Emma's behavior. It was Dad's willful blindness to the reality of who was actually running his company. When clients complimented our efficiency, he'd smile and say, "We've got a great team." When competitors tried to poach our staff, he'd boast about the family culture he had created. When industry awards arrived recognizing our innovation, he'd accept them on behalf of the whole organization. He had mastered the art of taking credit while sharing none of the recognition, always using plural pronouns that made my individual contributions disappear into some collective family effort. I started keeping detailed records of my projects, innovations, and contributions, thinking that someday I'd need them for a performance review or promotion discussion. Dad would occasionally mention that we should sit down and talk about your future here, but those conversations never materialized. Instead, I got more responsibilities, more critical projects, and more reasons why I was indispensable to the operation. I was too valuable as a worker to be promoted to leadership, too competent to be given credit, and too invested to walk away. It was the perfect trap, and I had built it myself with my own dedication and competence. After a decade of this pattern, I finally started questioning whether my loyalty was being returned or just exploited. I watched other companies promote talented employees, offer profit-sharing programs, and create clear paths to partnership or ownership. I saw former colleagues advance in their careers while I remained frozen in a role that had outgrown its title and compensation years earlier. When I hesitantly brought up the possibility of discussing my future with the company, Dad would deflect with vague promises about when the time is right or after we get through this busy period. I started researching what I could earn elsewhere, what my innovations and experience were worth in the open market, and the numbers were sobering. I was earning about 60% of market rate for someone with my skills and track record, while the company I had transformed was generating millions in revenue that I had no stake in. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't building my future. I was subsidizing everyone else's success with my underpaid labor and unrewarded expertise. For the first time in 15 years, I allowed myself to imagine what my life might look like somewhere else, with people who valued contribution over family politics. I was finally ready to have the conversation I should have demanded years earlier, to lay out my contributions and ask for the recognition and compensation I had earned through 15 years of dedication. I prepared a comprehensive presentation detailing every system I had created, every process I had improved, and every dollar of value I had added to the company. I practiced my talking points, researched industry standards for partnership agreements, and convinced myself that Dad would finally see reason when confronted with objective evidence of my worth. I scheduled a meeting for the week after Christmas, planning to start the new year with a new relationship based on mutual respect and fair compensation. I was nervous, but optimistic. finally ready to advocate for myself after years of silent service. I had no idea that Dad was planning his own announcement, one that would render all my preparation meaningless. Then came the announcement that would shatter everything I believed about family, loyalty, and the value of hard work. What happened on Christmas morning would prove that I had been playing by rules that only applied to me. When Dad finally stood up and announced he had something special to share with his girls, I felt that mixture of hope and dread that had defined my relationship with him for decades. He cleared his throat like he was giving a speech at a shareholders meeting, his face serious, but his eyes bright with excitement. "I've been thinking a lot about the future of our company," he began, "and I've decided it's time to make some important changes to ensure its continued success." My heart hammered against my ribs as I allowed myself to imagine that this moment, this Christmas morning, would finally be when my 15 years of dedication paid off. Maybe he was going to announce a partnership, or officially recognize my contributions, or at least acknowledge that I had been the driving force behind everything we had accomplished. Instead, he turned to Emma with the smile that could power the Christmas lights and said the words that would haunt me forever. "Emma, I'm naming you as my successor and transferring ownership of the company to you effective immediately." The room spun around me as those words hit like physical blows, each syllable destroying another piece of the future I thought I had been building. The justification that followed was somehow worse than the announcement itself, each word chosen to minimize my contributions while elevating Emma's non-existent qualifications. "Emma has the advanced education and strategic thinking this company needs to compete in the modern marketplace," Dad explained, as if I had it modernizing our operations for over a decade. "She has an MBA from a prestigious program and understands current business trends in ways that will take us to the next level." I sat there in stunned silence as he continued dismantling my life's work with corporate buzzwords and academic credentials that had no basis in reality. "Rachel has done wonderful work in operations," he added with a tone of someone praising a reliable janitor. "But leadership requires a different skill set, and Emma's education has prepared her for the strategic challenges ahead." The casual way he dismissed 15 years of innovation, problem solving, and company building as merely operations felt like being erased from my own story. He spoke about Emma's fresh perspective and outside experience as if my intimate knowledge of every aspect of the business was somehow a disadvantage. Every word confirmed what I had always suspected but never wanted to admit. In Dad's eyes, I would never be more than competent help, while Emma would always be extraordinary simply by existing. Then came the final humiliation, delivered with the casual cruelty that only family can perfect. Dad handed Emma an elaborate folder containing legal documents, financial statements, and what appeared to be comprehensive succession plans that had obviously been in development for months. For me, he produced a simple white envelope that felt suspiciously light in my trembling hands. Inside was a check for $500 and a typed letter on company letterhead that read like a termination notice disguised as a thank you card. "Your dedicated service to our family business has been greatly appreciated," it began. "But as we transition to new leadership, we will no longer require your services. Please consider this a token of our gratitude for your years of loyal employment." Employment. Not partnership, not family legacy, not recognition of my contributions. Employment that was being terminated with a severance package that wouldn't cover 2 weeks of my mortgage. The letter was signed, "Best regards, Robert Henderson, CEO," as if I were a stranger receiving a form letter rather than my daughter who had sacrificed everything for his success. I read it twice, 3 times, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that acknowledged even a fraction of what I had given to build their wealth. The family's reaction to my obvious devastation was perhaps the most telling part of the entire nightmare. Emma squealed with delight about her exciting new adventure and immediately started talking about transforming the company culture and implementing innovative strategies she had learned in school. Mom busied herself cleaning up wrapping paper and chattering about how wonderful it was that Emma would finally be settling down and using her education. Dad went back to reading his newspaper as if he hadn't just destroyed my entire future with a casual announcement between coffee and Christmas dinner. Not one of them seemed to notice or care that I was sitting there in shock, struggling to process the magnitude of what had just happened. When I finally found my voice and asked if this was really happening, if 15 years of my life really meant so little, Dad looked up from his paper with mild irritation and said, "Rachel, you're being dramatic. This is business, not personal." The disconnect was so complete, so absolute, that I realized I had been living in a different reality than the rest of my family for decades. While I thought I was building my future, they thought I was providing convenient labor that could be discarded whenever they found a better option. In that moment of crushing clarity, sitting in a living room full of people who had never really seen me, I felt something shift inside my chest like a lock finally clicking open. The desperate need for their approval, the hope that my hard work would eventually pay off, the belief that family loyalty was a two-way street, all of it crumbled and fell away, leaving behind something harder and clearer than anything I had felt in years. I looked around at these people who shared my DNA but not my values, who had taken my dedication for granted while planning my replacement, and I felt the strangest sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had no obligations to them, no reason to consider their feelings or protect their interests. They had freed me from the burden of caring about their success by making it clear that my well-being had never been part of their equation. I thought about the patents registered in my name, the systems that would fail without my maintenance, the passwords and access codes that only I knew, and I smiled for the first time that morning. They thought they were getting rid of an employee, but they had just declared war on the person who actually ran their company. I stood up slowly, folded the insulting letter carefully, and put it in my purse along with the pathetic check that was supposed to represent the value of my entire adult life. "Thank you for making everything so clear," I said in the calmest voice I could manage, watching their faces for any sign that they understood the weight of what they had just done. Dad looked relieved that I was taking it so well. Mom smiled and suggested we move on to dinner preparations, and Emma was already on her phone, probably telling her friends about her exciting new position. I walked around the room, giving each of them a hug that felt like a goodbye to people I had already lost long before this moment. "I love you all," I said, and I meant it, even though I knew that love would never again include sacrificing my own life for their comfort. I gathered my coat and purse, wished them a Merry Christmas, and walked out of that house knowing I would never return as the same person who had entered it that morning. As I drove away, I wasn't thinking about revenge or retaliation. I was thinking about justice, about showing them the true value of what they had just thrown away. They wanted to play business games with family relationships, and I was about to teach them why that was the worst mistake they could have made. I drove through the empty streets at 3 in the morning, with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in 15 years. The city was quiet except for the occasional police car or delivery truck, and the silence gave me space to think about what I was about to do. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense. This was reclaiming what had always been mine, asserting ownership over the systems and innovations that had built their fortune. I parked in my usual spot at the company, a space I had occupied thousands of times as a dedicated employee, but never as someone who truly understood her own power. The building looked different in the darkness, less like the second home where I had poured out my soul, and more like the crime scene where my future had been stolen. I sat in my car for a moment, going through my mental checklist of everything I needed to do, every system I needed to secure, every access point I needed to control. They thought they had fired an employee, but they had actually just declared war on the architect of their entire operation. I felt calmer than I had in months, finally free to stop pretending that their interests and mine were aligned. Walking through those familiar doors felt like stepping into a different dimension, where I was finally the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in theirs. My key card still worked. They hadn't even thought to revoke my access yet, probably assuming I would just fade away quietly like a good little employee. The building was mine in the darkness, every hallway and office a testament to systems I had designed, problems I had solved, and improvements I had implemented over the years. I made my way to the server room, the heart of the operation, that pumped digital life through every aspect of their business. These servers ran the software I had written, stored the data I had organized, and executed the processes I had optimized through years of patient work. Looking at the blinking lights and humming processors, I realized that this room contained the real power in the company, not the corner office where Dad signed papers, but the technological infrastructure that made every transaction, every report, and every decision possible. For the first time in my career there, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by the fruits of my actual labor, rather than sitting in meetings where other people took credit for my work. I began the process of shutting down systems with the methodical precision of someone who had built them from the ground up. First, I disabled the automated reporting systems that generated the daily operational summaries Dad relied on to understand what was happening in his own company. Then I locked down the inventory management system that tracked every piece of raw material, work in progress, and finished product in our warehouses. The customer relationship management database came next, along with the order processing system that managed everything from initial quotes to final delivery. Each shutdown was deliberate and complete, designed not to damage anything permanently, but to demonstrate just how dependent their operation was on systems they had never bothered to understand. I moved through the digital infrastructure like a surgeon removing vital organs, careful not to destroy, but determined to control. The production scheduling software, the quality control tracking system, the financial reporting tools, everything that made the company function in the modern world was under my control, and I was systematically putting it to sleep. The most satisfying part was changing all the administrative passwords and security codes to systems I had personally developed and maintained. Years of being the computer person who fixed everyone's problems had given me master access to everything, and they had never thought to limit or monitor my permissions. I created new encryption keys for our most sensitive databases, changed the recovery questions to information only I would know, and activated security protocols that would require my personal authorization to override. The irony was delicious. They had always treated me like I was just technical support, never realizing that technical support in a modern business means holding the keys to absolutely everything. I documented each change carefully, not because I planned to reverse them easily, but because I wanted a complete record of just how much of their operation depended on my expertise. By the time I finished, attempting to run the company without my cooperation would be like trying to drive a car without an engine. They could sit in the driver's seat and turn the steering wheel all they wanted to, But nothing would move without my permission. The phone call came at 8:47 a.m., exactly when the morning shift would have arrived to discover that none of their systems were operational. Dad's voice on the other end was a mixture of panic and confusion that I had never heard before. The confident authority completely stripped away. "Rachel, something's wrong with all our computer systems," he said, as if I might rush over to fix yet another crisis for free. "Nothing's working. We can't access orders, can't run production schedules, can't even see our inventory levels. Our IT contractor says it looks like everything's been locked down from the inside." I let him explain the full scope of the problem, listening to him describe the chaos unfolding in what used to be a smoothly running operation. Workers standing around with nothing to do, customers calling about delayed orders, production lines sitting idle because the scheduling system was down. "Can you come in and help us figure this out?" he asked, still not understanding that the helpful daughter who solved everyone's problems no longer existed. The desperation in his voice was music to my ears. The first time in 15 years that he truly needed me and couldn't just take my assistance for granted. "I'm not coming in, Dad," I said calmly, enjoying the way my words seemed to confuse him even more. "Yesterday, you made it very clear that my services are no longer required, so I'm respecting your decision." The silence stretched between us as he processed what I was telling him, probably trying to figure out if this was coincidence or something more deliberate. "Rachel, this isn't the time for games," he said, his voice shifting from confused to demanding. "We have a business to run, and whatever personal feelings you have about yesterday need to be set aside." I almost laughed at his inability to connect cause and effect, his assumption that I would continue prioritizing his needs over my own dignity, even after being so thoroughly humiliated. "This isn't personal, Dad," I replied, using his own words from Christmas morning. "This is business. Emma has an MBA and strategic thinking skills, so I'm sure she'll figure out how to handle this little technical issue." The way he sputtered and stammered told me he was finally beginning to understand that his reliable problem solver was no longer available for consultation. When he threatened to sue me for sabotage, I could hear the edge of panic creeping into his voice, the realization that he had no idea how to run the company he thought he owned. "Before you start making legal threats," I said, my voice still calm but carrying a new edge of steel, "there's something you should know about those systems you can't access." The silence on the other end told me I had his complete attention for probably the first time in our relationship. All of the software that runs your company, the inventory management, the production scheduling, the customer databases, the financial reporting tools, I didn't just implement those systems, Dad. I created them. And I was smart enough to register all the patents and intellectual property in my own name. I let that sink in for a moment, imagining his face as he realized the implications of what I was telling him. "So when you're talking to your lawyers about suing me, you might want to mention that you've been using my proprietary software for the past decade without paying licensing fees. I think they'll find that very interesting." The quality of his silence changed, becoming heavier and more desperate as the full scope of his situation became clear. Then I told him something that made him go silent completely. Something that would change the balance of power between us forever. Every single piece of software that makes your company profitable is registered as my intellectual property. The inventory system that saves you hundreds of thousands in waste reduction? Mine. The production optimization algorithms that increased your efficiency by 40%? Mine. The customer management platform that tripled your client retention? Mine. Even the financial reporting tools you use to calculate profits? All mine, all legally protected, all completely unusable without my authorization. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, probably trying to process the magnitude of what I was telling him. I've been licensing my own software to you for free all these years because I thought I was building my future with the company. But since you've made it clear that I have no future there, I'm officially revoking that license effective immediately. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. But finally I heard him whisper, "How is that possible?" His confusion was almost pitiable. 15 years of taking my work for granted had blinded him to the reality that I had been protecting my innovations all along, just waiting for the day when that protection might matter. What followed was a week of pure chaos that I watched unfold from the comfort of my apartment, like a fascinating case study in corporate meltdown. Dad called 17 times the first day alone, his messages escalating from confused to angry to desperate to pleading. Emma tried reaching out through social media, suddenly wanting to talk things through and find a family solution to what she called a misunderstanding. Mom left tearful voicemails about how I was destroying the family and being vindictive over a business decision. The company ground to a complete halt. Orders couldn't be processed, production schedules couldn't be generated, inventory couldn't be tracked, and financial reports couldn't be created. Their IT contractor confirmed what I already knew. The systems were completely locked down and would require the original developers' cooperation to restore. Within 3 days, they had to halt all operations and send workers home because nothing could function without the digital infrastructure I had created. Customers started canceling orders, suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding invoices that they couldn't access, and the seamless operation I had built over 15 years collapsed like a house of cards the moment I stopped holding it together. The attempts at reconciliation were as insulting as the original betrayal, revealing just how little they understood about the situation they had created. Dad offered to reconsider my termination and find a place for me in Emma's organization, as if I would crawl back to work under the sister who had inherited my life's work. Emma suggested we could collaborate on getting the systems running again, promising to make sure I was properly credited for my contributions going forward. They offered me a salary increase, a better title, even a small percentage of ownership, everything they could have given me years earlier when it might have mattered. The most laughable offer came when they suggested I could stay on as Chief Technology Officer under Emma's leadership, reporting to someone who couldn't even set up her own Wi-Fi network. They simply couldn't comprehend that this wasn't about money or position or recognition anymore. This was about the fundamental reality that they had treated me as disposable. And disposable people don't get to negotiate their way back to importance. Every offer revealed their continued belief that I was someone whose dignity and self-respect could be purchased if they just found the right price. When they finally realized that begging and bargaining wouldn't work, they tried threats, which only made my position stronger. Dad's lawyer sent a letter demanding I restore access to company systems, apparently not understanding that you can't steal your own property. When I had my own attorney respond with documentation proving my ownership of all the disputed software, along with a bill for 15 years of unpaid licensing fees, the threats stopped immediately. The final negotiation was conducted through lawyers and was beautifully simple. I would sell them permanent licenses to use my software for a lump sum payment that reflected its true value, plus ongoing consulting fees if they wanted me to maintain or update the systems. The price tag was high enough to make Dad's face turn purple when his lawyer explained it to him, but low enough that it was still cheaper than trying to rebuild everything from scratch. Emma would get to keep her company, but it would be a company that paid me handsomely for the privilege of using my innovations. The contract was ironclad and non-negotiable. They could take it or watch their business collapse permanently. They took it, of course, because they had no choice, but the balance of power had shifted forever. The financial settlement gave me something I had never had before: true independence and the freedom to build a life that belonged entirely to me. I used the money to start my own technology consulting firm, helping other family businesses modernize their operations without getting trapped in the emotional manipulation that had defined my previous career. My expertise in manufacturing software was in high demand, and clients were willing to pay premium rates for someone who understood both the technical and human sides of business transformation. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that was mine from the ground up, where my contributions were recognized, valued, and fairly compensated. I hired a small team of brilliant engineers, established clear profit sharing agreements, and created the kind of workplace I had always wished I could have. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had to lose everything I thought I wanted in order to gain everything I actually needed. Within 2 years, my company was generating more profit than I had ever seen in my decade and a half of unpaid labor, and every dollar of it belonged to me. The aftermath for my family was exactly what they had earned through their choices, though I took no particular pleasure in their struggles. Dad never quite recovered from the realization that his simple operational employee had been the mastermind behind his company's success, and he aged visibly under the stress of running a business that no longer felt like his own. Emma discovered that having an MBA means nothing when you're trying to manage systems you don't understand, implemented by someone who will never again work for free. She lasted 8 months as CEO before Dad had to resume control, and their relationship never recovered from the blame and resentment that followed. The company survived, but never thrived the way it had when I was pouring my heart into its success, limping along as a shadow of what it could have been. They had gotten exactly what they asked for: a family business without me in it, and learned too late that I had been the secret ingredient in everything they thought they had built themselves. We exchange Christmas cards now, polite and distant, acknowledging the blood connection while accepting that the emotional bonds were severed by their own hands. Looking back now, I understand that Christmas morning wasn't the day my family betrayed me. It was the day they finally revealed a betrayal that had been happening my entire life. They had always seen me as a resource to be used rather than a person to be valued. And I had enabled that dynamic by accepting crumbs of recognition while providing banquets of service. The real tragedy wasn't that they chose Emma over me. It was that I had spent 15 years trying to earn something that was never actually available for me to win. My mistake wasn't working too hard or caring too much. It was believing that family meant something different to them than it actually did. But their betrayal also gave me the greatest gift imaginable: complete freedom from the burden of trying to please people who were incapable of being pleased. Today, I wake up every morning in a life I built entirely for myself, surrounded by people who see my value clearly and compensate me fairly for my contributions. I learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing, because it forces you to stop settling for less than you deserve and start demanding everything you're worth. The family that thought they were discarding me actually set me free.